Hello, I'm Joe.
And TJ?
We are the Schoolhouse 302, and we are excited to bring you our 302 thoughts for this month's focus. Really, TJ, which has been focused on the pandemic, a lot of what's going on with social injustice in America and what people have started to call the dual pandemics. But we took a different approach this month. We started thinking about change in education, reform, and we started to wonder, what would John Dewey think? I'm not sure, but John Dewey may be the most quoted signature line person in education. I see very often John Dewey quotes below people's names. I don't know if that's true, like he's the most, but I thought, why not? People love John Dewey. He's heralded as an education reformer, a psychologist, but has made a huge impact in many ways. So let's dig in a little bit in this 302 thoughts. Let's talk a little bit about John Dewey, this month's focus, the whole idea of change in our schools, but also what that means for the future. And we tried to build that in for this month. TJ?
Yeah, it truly is a mindset to embrace change, to accept a changing atmosphere, to experience that with the will to find something new, to innovate. And actually, Dewey, as a philosopher, found that that actually helped us with our own happiness within the culture of our organization and within our lives, because we can feel ourselves growing and experiencing new events. And there's a lot of bad, obviously, that came out of COVID. But when we ask the question, what would John Dewey think, we have to include the fact that all of the good that came from it, in terms of what we learned as educators and some of the new practices and new mentalities we have, and the support that we're putting in place for kids, even the financial support, which we're going to write about next month, really is something that we can experience and hopefully find joy within amongst such a difficult time. And so I love the stuff with Dewey, because he was just a reformist. He was an innovative thinker. He was a philosopher, and he really did look into the future of education. It's amazing that some of the things he was talking about when he was in the 30s are things that we'll still, in many ways, looking to implement today. And a lot of what we saw during COVID in terms of the student-centered part of the work that he pushed. What do you think about that, Joe?
No, I agree. And what's funny is if you read Experience and Education, which a lot of people attribute, and now he was a very prolific writer. So let's establish that. You could commit years to reading his work. That said, Experience in Education, and we featured How We Think. One, they're not that large of reads. They are deep, though. We loved it for that reason. A lot of times we are thinking, all right, what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? What strategy? What action? What program? And in education, we become such solvers that I think that we sometimes miss, like, okay, yeah, that's a good vehicle that's going to help kids read. But what does this mean for the whole child? Yeah, we also building the disposition of I love reading. And so that, I think, is what is incredible about doing this whole notion of whole child. And it's really interesting because when you get into his work, you could argue that he wrote it like 2 months ago. I mean, that's the bizarre thing. So we talk about a reformer, also someone who was right there with his thinking as a very progressive thinker. So some of the claims we brought through, I just want to make one very clear because I think it's incredible for our listeners to recognize. One claim that we made is there is no doubt that schools have become the central hubs of our communities. And we have seen this from us delivering food to, or setting up, centers for food, even wellness centers that continue to operate. You know, schools are the central point for other organizations to get in contact with families. And I think if we go back centuries, there were a lot of other ways in which to connect with families. But now schools emerged specifically during the pandemic as the place. And I think it's also a really opportune time for us as educators, for us within the community, business owners, and then those like in roundtables and so on that I know truly want to build connections and partnerships with schools, other organizations, nonprofits, and even our legislature to recognize, look, what can we do more in schools? Not that educators will do, because a lot of what's happening now is it's falling on the educators. We're saying now as a system, as an educational system, how could we start using that as a delivery or a mode and build it more as an organizational powerhouse within the community? I think that's something we have to recognize, because even right now, when students are struggling and so on, we outsource a lot of that work. What if we were able to have that within our school community, and maybe not within each school, but within each district, and share resources for some of those needs rather than always going third party? Build these memorandums of understanding and focus on some of the trauma, some of the social and emotional that we need to wrestle with our students as we seek to re-engage them in the fall. So that's just something that I'm really focused on lately. And I think that's something with Dewey, with the support, the opportunity, and the engagement, from the little bit that I understand of his world, and I would say it's that much. I think that's something that we have to recognize as a community, as reform thinkers, and really make a difference for our students.
Yeah, that's really important. We always like to leave our listeners with a technical tip, and so I'm going to hit something here. Is that the concept of doing inventory? I don't know that that's deeply ingrained enough in educators and educational leadership, but we can do an inventory of the community supports, the places that we send our students, our families who are in need. Create that inventory of all of the services that we connect kids with, and make sure that that's at the forefront of either posting that for families or having it in our guidance counseling offices, our school counselor offices, and just making sure we do an inventory. Another inventory we can do are the school services that we provide. Maybe it's the after school activities. Are we hitting enough activities for all kids? And it may be an inventory of the kids who's participating in those activities. We want them to participate, to spend time. That is how we build an environment for the whole child, for the family, to create that hub that Joe talked about. And so hopefully you got something from our 302 thoughts here on our One Thing series. We'll be back next month. We always appreciate a like, a follow, a share to a friend. And don't forget to connect with us at theschoolhouse302.com.